Thank you so much for joining us here, the Voice of Job Seekers. And if you want to know more about what we do here and the resources we have for job search and for job seekers, you can go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com. In the meantime, I wanted to introduce to you Susan Rooks. She's also known as the Grammar Goddess. She's been around the world facilitating workshops on business writing, advanced secretarial skills, maintaining emotional control, and a number of other topics. She has more than 300 posts on LinkedIn. In fact, she told me it was 350 plus. And she has even more on her website, grammargoddess.com. I want to welcome to the show Susan Rooks.
I'm
How
very
are
well,
you?
thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's an honor to have you, and I looked at your work, and I'm just amazed of the depth of knowledge that you have on a number of topics, and not just one. I mean, literally, you've been around the world. You've been to, you've been to all the continents, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I got lucky with a
and
seminar company back in the early 90s, and they sent me around the world, and I found out that I'm good at some things, not so good at others, but grammar was the one that really grabbed me, and I built my business based on those experiences and the reality that I'm good at a couple of things, and grammar's one of them.
Yes, and we love you for it. I do. And I think this is going to be a great discussion today because I get concerned and very often on all levels of seeing grammar errors, not just on the obvious of resumes and cover letters, but on business communication overall. And probably more so, as we've both seen, on social media. There's plenty of it to go around. And in the days of personal branding, every bit of communication counts. So maybe you can just re-emphasize the importance of having correct grammar on every bit of communication that you send out to the world.
Well, I do think it's important. Obviously, I am the grammar goddess, but I find that I meet with a lot of resistance because even though social media is here to stay, it'll keep changing, but we do put a lot of written material out, and many people will say, it doesn't really matter if I don't use the comma correctly or if I don't use its and its correctly, because no one else seems to care. I think we can say they do care, but they're not necessarily going to walk up and go, yo, Mark, you didn't do it correctly, We just stop following people. I don't publicly shame anyone. Start with that. No way will I put out a post that says, Susan Rooks, you blew it, baby. You made a mistake. That's not fair. If it's someone who's given me permission or has asked for the help, I'll drop a private message and say, hey, I know you meant IT''S, but oops, that kind of thing. It does count. You don't know who's looking. You don't know why they're looking. If they're looking at your profile on any of the social media platforms, and it can be as simple as the one on Facebook. People on Facebook take it a little less seriously because it's meant to be fun and cute and personal, but the impression is still there. You are either seen as, oh, really nice stuff, or, I'm not so sure about that. It's worse on LinkedIn. We're all there looking for jobs. We're looking for clients. We're business professionals. We're saying, hey, I'm smart. I count. And then we make a dozen errors that we should have known about, and we lose some credibility. So, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. No. Well, you know what? I think this is a very important conversation to have because I think one of the things that we have to consider, the Facebook spectrum, I think, is changing to a much more professional. I think for me, a lot of my colleagues are on my Facebook friends. And quite frankly, I think a lot of my posts are, geared towards even understanding that a lot of them are in the audience. And I'm very conscious about having, a quality Facebook posts and update every time I do one, even if it's fun, because it does give the impression, to other people and their audience. In other words, your Facebook friends has an audience too. So they're looking on, and I know a lot of them have people who are in press, people who are nationally recognized, people who are on the big networks all the time, and they're influenced, quite frankly. Some of them even have verified accounts. So I know that they're looking too at where I make comment because of the person that I'm connected to. So for me, that's a big deal. It may not be that big a deal for some, but I think for others who are striving to have a personal brand these days, a quality one that where you want people to notice you, I think that grammar is everything that you do and all the updates that you put forth, even if they're fun, it matters.
Yeah, it does matter. I mean, this stuff's not going away. They do say don't put anything out on social media that you wouldn't want your mother to see on the front page of the New York Times. Good advice. And, you and I take it a step further, and we say it does count if you can use English correctly or any other language, by the way. The only language I speak is English, and it's American English. Right. It isn't English. I've traveled the world, and I know darn right well. Down in Australia, trust me, they don't speak my version of English. New Zealand, same thing. South Africa, thing. But it is still important that we use what we know to be true in our country, whatever country it is, and our language, and do it correctly. You simply don't know who's looking. Yes, and you don't know how they're judging. And we do judge. It's not fair, but it's real. We do judge. We ascribe other qualities to somebody. That's true. Based on impressions. If somebody looks right, is dressed well for an interview, we have an automatic thought, oh, okay, fine, he should be good. And then he gives us his resume, and it's full of errors, and we think, wait a minute. Or something comes out of his mouth that's not right. We keep making those judgments, and once you've posted something, it's out there. Yeah. It's not going away, and you don't know where it's going. My friend, I share things, don't you?
Yeah, all the time.
But I won't even share a funny meme. This is how bad it gets, Mark. Bad, really bad. Yeah. A meme can be really funny, grammatically funny, but if it isn't grammatically correct, I won't share it.
Right.
I will put in, I did this the other day, it was a really nice little picture that I put out on LinkedIn, and it was a full sentence, and it did not have a period at the end. I photoshopped it. Yeah. I put a period at the end, and then I felt much more comfortable sharing it. That's really way out on the insanity.
That might be on my standards. If it's funny, the period won't count as much. But I think for what your brand is as a grammar goddess, of course, your expectations should be the highest, I would imagine.
Oh, heavens, yes. And, it's funny. When I do the proofreading and people say, well, gee, there's a lot of people out there who English isn't their first language. Trust me, I get that. I honor anyone who can speak this language on top of their own native language, and many of my followers on all these platforms speak multiple languages. I'm in awe. Right. Speak one. I can say, where is the bathroom in about 5 languages. I've learned that's kind of a good thing to learn. Right. And hello and goodbye. But, Mark, when you realize those aren't errors to me, when people whose native tongue is anything from Arabic to Italian, if they can get a point across and it's close to English, I'm impressed. Yeah. Because I sure can't do it in their language.
Yeah. Being that we, our language is a melting pot of different languages. I think I've seen people. My son's English teacher really, as I've read about him and what he does, he'll admit that is the most difficult to write a perfect paper on without having at least a little bit of help.
Yeah, it's not easy. One of the things that I know to be true as well is one of the things you and I had mentioned talking a little bit about was acceptable versus good grammar.
Yes.
And to me, the difference between those two is punctuation matters, but not for most readers as much as word usage.
Mm-hmm.
More of us are aware of the its and the your, the Y-O-U-R versus Y-O-U apostrophe R-E.
Mm-hmm.
Many people haven't got a clue as to whether you need a comma here or you should put a semicolon there. This is what I know. But when I'm teaching, I'm as blunt and honest as I can be. If your boss wants a semicolon in that place and it won't embarrass you,
Mm-hmm.
it won't mislead a reader, and it won't embarrass, even more important, your boss, put the semicolon in. It's not worth losing a job over,
Right.
and it is not worth having an argument over.
Right.
But if it's the wrong it's, go change it and make it right, because that is going to matter somewhere down the road. Punctuation helps. It gives us structure.
Mm-hmm.
I like using it correctly. But honestly, I don't think most people know whether I do or not. They presume I do because I'm the grammar goddess.
Right.
So my thought is this. If you really don't know for sure, and you're pretty sure you're not embarrassing anybody or looking stupid, don't argue with your boss. Just put the semicolon in, put the colon in, and then go look it up, and maybe your boss will learn, and you'll learn. But I'm not trying to be a martinet here. I'm not trying to say there's only one way you can do it, because it's not true.
Right, that's true. And since you initiated what we talked about earlier, I think there are lines between the business writing and creative writing, and we can put creative writing, if we want to structure it. We could say if you have even a flair for writing. And there's the academic writing. There are sliding rules to some extent, as far as, what we send out to the world. And maybe we could talk a little bit what might be, social media like, and how that's really trickled into what's good for business.
Well, business writing, you've named three really good ones. Creative writing, which is what many of us got in high school, which immediately means we never learned another good rule.
Right.
We're told, just write from your heart, honey. Just write whatever comes to you. Don't worry about the rest of it. And many people completely lost track of anything they were taught in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Then there's business writing, which is my main way of writing. And then, of course, academic, I don't even go there. It's a whole other kind of genre. But for me, business writing is what we should be using in social media. It's a nice middle ground. Clarity. For me, it's the only point of it is clarity.
Right.
That's the only reason I like punctuation at all, because more often than not, it can help. But one of my daughters years ago said, "Mom, everybody's laughing at me because I'm using full sentences in my emails." And a lot of folks weren't at the time. And I said, you know what? You're smart to do that, because if you learn it right and do it correctly, you'll continue to do it when you have to. Someone else said, it doesn't matter if I'm just dashing off a text, that was recent text, or I'm just posting on Facebook. And I thought, well, it matters if you're not comfortable with the rules, because on the day when you have to put it right, can you do that?
Right.
If you can't, my best advice, learn the rule, understand why it's important, understand how it makes you look when you use it correctly, and then on that day when you absolutely must do it that way, you will, because it won't be a struggle. I can go back and forth. I can have fun with words. I mean, some of my posts are pure, dumb fun. Friday. I put out Friday Funs, and I find the weirdest autocorrect things, oh my word, all that sort of thing. Those are pure fun.
Yeah.
I can use the word gonna, and I can use wanna, and people know darn right well what I'm doing. I'm making fun of something.
Sure.
Because this is my world, Mark.
Right.
You know how to run a podcast. You know how to do what you do. All the people that I help know what they do. My only goal is to help them look and sound as smart as they are, using my skills and making sure that they're communicating the way they think they are.
Right.
And that's the other, isn't
Right.
it? Oh, I sent her that email and she never responded. Did you say, please respond? No. Okay.
Well, it just takes 4
she
words.
didn't know.
Let me know what you think.
Yes, something.
Yeah, right.
It's not even dumbing down. It's being respectful.
Right.
years ago, and I'll stop there. Years ago, I was working for a company, and I remember I was a secretary. We're talking 30 years. And I still remember an email, a message coming through. It wasn't an email; it was a memo, and it said there will be a meeting on the loading dock at 4:00. I was a secretary, so told my boss, and he said, "Okay, great." 20 minutes after the meeting started, all the secretaries got phone calls from their bosses. Where are you? I'm sitting here in my office. Why? Why aren't you at the meeting? Because the memo never said this is for everybody.
Oh.
So we, secretaries, not high-status people, we didn't know. And I use that in my classes because I want people to remember what you know as a writer may not be coming through to the reader. Mm-hmm. Have you been completely clear? I mean, if you want that person to call you, say so. Hey, give me a call at 4:00.
Right.
Let me know what you think of this thing. So this is my version of business writing. Clarity. You don't have to use words that you have to look up and you can't spell to save your life. Those aren't fair.
Right.
Get the point across. Nobody has time to wonder what you meant.
Right. Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the more interesting parts of the grammar discussion. I think the one major one is, and I had a discussion with a client about, is using passive voice.
Good old passive voice.
Yeah. That's that's a tough one to kind of convince people. As far as we were talking about, again, we're talking about business. We're talking about leaving a good impression, telling them exactly what you want, and for them to do exactly what you need them to do. The importance of, and I've seen plenty of business writers say that in this day, passive voice is okay if you are just writing casually, even if you're just writing a blog post on your own blog. Passive voice is not a crime, but those of us who took the next step academically, passive voice is the alter ego of the devil. So in your view, yes, the alter ego of the devil. You should not have a passive voice. And I think what I try to do, I try to come a little bit more on the not to have so much passive voice over the years, not to have an egregious amount of passive voice. What's your take on it?
Well, it's funny because we talk a lot about passive voice in the business writing program that I pulled together.
Yeah.
Passive voice, for anyone listening, and if you're not sure what we're talking about, when we start a sentence with an individual, it could be a company, it could be a human, but when we identify the doer of the action, the actor, right up front, that's active voice. We're saying, Susan created the post. You immediately know who did it because the first word is Susan. Or the manager called a meeting. Okay, you know who did it. The manager. You start with an actor, you follow it with an action. That's active. The reverse, which is wordier, and sometimes terribly unclear, could be as simple as the post was created by Susan. So you find out what happened, and then you find out who did it. That's passive voice. But at least if you're putting in the doer, the reader gets the information. It's a little backwards, it's wordier, and it takes a little bit more effort to read and understand. So the worst kind is, in one of my sentences in my workbook, something to the effect of, the meeting minutes should be organized and sent out by Monday. And a reader or a listener is left with the idea of, okay, who's going to do it? Because you didn't say. That's the worst kind of passive voice in terms of business writing. You do need to get someone in there who's going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to have somebody in your company is going to say, go ahead, show me where it says my name. Go ahead. I don't see my name. I don't see my job. I didn't know I was supposed to do it.
Right.
And that can happen when we're not clear. Now, the times when I think we should and can use passive voice, when you don't know, when you honestly, one of my sentences again from the workbook, and just remembering it, the rates for the Water Commission were set back in 1991. by whom? Who knows?
Right.
We're talking, how many years are we talking? 20, 30? I'm losing track of time. Those were set back so far that nobody knows and nobody cares. So you're perfectly acceptable to use passive voice there because who knows? But if you want clarity and if you want shorter, easier to understand sentences, then I go with active voice 95% of the time. Susan created the post, or the post was created by Susan. 4 words versus 6.
Yeah.
So, yes, I had never heard about the devil, but I do know that except for a few occasional times when it makes sense to use passive, the rest, we're all so busy, we don't have time for extra words.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take on it. And if anybody really wants to know how to turn one into the other, I can help you do that too.
Right.
It's a really simple system.
Well, I think, like you said, when there's not a direct object involved or a direct person involved,
Yep.
it leaves for interpretation, which is something that you want to avoid in a business atmosphere. When we talk about online writing, if you're trying to get an idea across and you're interested in that idea going a little bit further than just it being an intended statement. You want to have some impact. It's got to have a punch, and it can't be, it just can't be out there floating around, which is what happens with the passive voice.
Long-winded and wordy don't
Yeah.
play well. It makes it very difficult for readers. Most of us get bored or turn it off or get confused. None of that is good. I'll go back to my original statement, clarity.
Yeah.
We don't have time for anything less than clarity. You need to be very clear about what you're saying, why you're saying it, and what you want the reader to do.
Yeah, I heard a lecture, and I think I used that in some workshops that I've led over time. Is that the example of it was from the time of when during Ronald Reagan's time when he was discussing the mishaps that have happened during one of the wars that we were fighting overseas. And the statement actually, and this lecturer's mind was very famous for a number of reasons, but what it came out of it is that when Reagan said shots were fired and mistakes were made, that
Right.
he did not, say who shot made the shots, or if even the U.S. made the shots. It was the fact that that shots were fired and mistakes were made, and it doesn't. It sent two messages in that particular point, but for him, for it to be this something you definitely want to avoid especially when you're doing public speaking,
Yes.
is that you really you lose credibility, you lose your audience. Maybe they do know what they do know what you want to say, and maybe they don't. But you shouldn't leave any doubt for them to think otherwise than what your intention is.
Yeah, and actually, that's a very good point to make. The other use for passive voice is if coming back to business and running a meeting, you could say in a meeting, "Oh, Mark made such a big mistake." Oh, and Mark is going to be so happy to have you say that publicly. No, not ever. But to turn it into passive voice, those 3 words, mistakes were made.
Yeah.
We may all know that Mark made the mistake, but without pointing it out, allows everybody to say, okay, yep, been some goofs. Okay, now what do we do going forward? It saves face.
Yeah.
And if that's an important piece of teamwork, which I think it is, I mean, if I've really made a mistake, if I made a big one, you think anybody doesn't know that? Point it out again. Susan, boy, I tell you, it doesn't help. So you can use passive voice and just say, hey, been some mistakes made. We're not saying by whom. By whom? Yes, whom would be good there. And let's move on and figure out how we don't make those same mistakes. I mean, it has its uses.
Sure.
It's
Sure it does. Sure it does.
It's wordy and longer and more overused than I think is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And I think people who want to, again, we talk about in a world where people write, people update to be noticed or to send a message, you got to understand that your intention isn't always the way it ends up being um, if you're being passive
Yeah.
for the most part. So another subset probably of that, and maybe we could talk a little bit about how important the grammar trends are and how they keep changing. And I think people find it a little difficult to keep up with some of the grammar trends, especially, and it kind of goes back to a little bit of the comma discussion that we were discussing of where we need to put that comma, the Oxford comma versus not putting the comma in that particular space.
Yeah, I
But
believe in the Oxford comma more than you can know. I push it everywhere I can. And this goes back to something I said about 10 minutes ago. If you're good enough to go back and forth with the rules, if you know the rules cold, the basic ones. I don't know every rule, Mark. I just put out a post on LinkedIn, and it was Confessions of the Grammar Goddess. I don't know every rule out there. I have 3 big, thick books here to help me do that, but I don't need to know them all. There are maybe 30 or 40 that are important, and I use them, and one is the Oxford, because leaving it out can cause a reader to think the last 2 items in a series work together, or they're the same thing. And if you didn't intend it, you can't go and then say, but Susan, you knew what I meant. No, if I'd known what you meant, I would have done what you asked. But the way you wrote it left some doubt. And again, a sentence, we have several positions available, stock clerk, comma, receptionist, comma, typist, and greeter. Now, do you have 4 positions or 3? If you leave comma out, somebody could think the last 2, what did I say, greeter and receptionist, those could be the same person. If you didn't mean them to be, the comma makes it clear without shouting it, but it makes it clear to most readers because there are better ways to write it. You could say we have 4 positions available.
Right.
But my thought is this, put it in. I don't want to have an internal conflict each time I'm typing a sentence or writing one. I want to just put it in, save myself an occasional embarrassment when somebody doesn't understand what I wrote, and never have to think about it again.
Right. Right.
Putting it in is safe. It's like buckling a safety belt. I don't have to think about it. I just do it. It's simple. And I've had, when I do proofreading, I have an occasional person who says, we do not allow the Oxford comma. And I will have a conversation if I dare. And at the end of the day, it is not my writing. It is their writing. If they don't want it, okay.
Right.
But somebody comes back and says, the way you wrote it, I thought this, you really have no defense because that's the way it looked to the person. So, yeah,
I think
me, Oxford commas, they rock.
well, the your inference I think is correct, and I don't know if you realized is that the audience really matters. Who you're writing it for really matters because I think, and I'll be safe to say that if you were in high school before 1980, more than likely you're using the Oxford comma. If you are if you were in high school in the 90s and past, that comma may not be there more frequently than not. And I don't know, that's not a scientific rule, but I noticed that my son's an English major, and they don't use the Oxford comma as opposed to I use the Oxford comma in most of the time. And I'll say that most of the time. There's sometimes I will leave it out if I feel like the clarity's already there and that there's a better flow. It's kind of an emotional thing for me. But for the most part, I think it might vary per audience. What are your thoughts
Well, we
on
should
it?
be thinking of our audience because we're not writing for ourselves. We're giving information. We're giving ideas. We certainly are supposed to be thinking of how will this be seen. We can't know 100%. We can make some educated guesses. And for anyone listening to this who is saying, what's the Oxford comma?
Right.
The Oxford, also known as the serial comma, SERIAL, not the stuff you eat for breakfast. One before and or at the end of a sentence. So if you've got 3 or 4 things you're enumerating, it's the one that I wish and Mark wishes would go in just to keep it safe.
Right.
For that one sentence that you might write every 3 years where somebody will be completely confused.
Right.
I don't have time for that.
Right.
I really don't.
Yeah.
So
it could be it's I think people make it more difficult than it actually is, but I think people are torn because they're hearing 2 different things, and that kind of goes along with the trend conversation that we were having in the sense of the landscape of grammar, the little small things they keep changing, because I think I think this is not the first time in as long as since I've graduated from high school, that comma has disappeared, then it comes back, then disappears, then it comes back. And so, again, thinking of your audience is probably some of the best advice. And for some people, it might be thinking of your client. If your client is more sensitive to those kinds of things, then you should leave it out, because that's how you're going to get paid.
Oh, absolutely. I explain why. But at the end of the day, when I'm proofreading, my ego is nowhere to be found. It's nothing to do with me. It's everything to do with what's the impression what's the impression you want to give? What are you writing about? What are the things that matter to you the most? When it comes to word usage, you don't argue with me, because if you're not going to use the wrong hits, you're just not going to use the wrong hits. It's not going to happen.
Right.
But in terms of the Oxford comma, as much as I think we should, if you absolutely don't want it and you're going to pay me my fee, you have the right to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to even make you feel bad about it. That's not my job.
Right.
My job is to explain why, let you understand why, because there usually is a reason for it. It's not just arbitrary, we thought we'd throw 3 commas in. No, there are reasons. But at the end of the day, Mark, it's not about me.
Right.
Never has been.
Right. Yeah. And
so the one other thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. The one other thing.
One other thing I'm seeing, you were mentioning trends changing. The one that was the hardest for me to have done right, no more two spaces between sentences. It makes me stark raving nuts, but I finally, after a year, trained my fingers to not double up on the space after a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. It is so hard to have a single space there, but I'm almost used to it. And now I'm seeing that we're also supposed to only have one space after a colon. Whimper.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Right.
To me, those are subjective. The colon thing, I don't think anyone knows about. The sentence, I had somebody publicly shame me on a post a couple of years ago when I was still doing 2. She said, how can you consider yourself an expert when you're using 2 spaces? And I'm thinking, okay, sweetie, you need to get a grip. Public shaming, A, is not a good thing. And B, it wasn't an absolute rule. It was more of a style thing.
Right.
Now it's mostly a rule, but I still think if you love 2 spaces, the heck.
Yeah.
Keep them.
I think
do it way all the way through the document.
Well, I think there are a couple of factors that influenced the way that we need to become more conscious. Was that Word, Microsoft Word, had a heavy influence on the way that we were pressing that space bar the second time, especially those of us who kind of made that transition from learning how to type on a typewriter.
I learned to type on a manual typewriter.
Yes,
Whoa.
and that's the typewriter I'm talking about, the manual, the old punch key. Yep. I think that influenced that transition because we were doing it twice at that particular time, as opposed to, now Word automatically does it, or any digital, any PC or Apple computer you're using, it automatically does it. And I think that transition kind of put that second space there when we didn't really need to. In fact, it's considered an error. As you said,
considered an error.
It's considered an error. It's a little small era in this, in that sense. It doesn't affect the way that it affects the way that it looks aesthetically, as opposed to it affects the way that what's being communicated. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, it is what it is.
It is what it is, and it took me quite a long time for my fingers and my eyes and my mind to say, okay, I guess so. What I'm lucky about is that grammar trends don't come along every day. Now, the social media thing, certainly the world is shrinking. We see and we can read posts from all over the world. I mean, I think I've got, out of 3,000 followers on LinkedIn, I'm not sure, but I think I've got 700 or 800 from the Arab world. Go figure the odds on that. And another 700 or 800 from India. Go figure the odds on that. I read what they write. They, for some reason, want to be reading what I'm writing. The world is just an amazing place, and we're getting to see it. So, yes, fun words come in, words that you wouldn't have thought would be real words. I just did a post on that. But it changes. But luckily, it changes reasonably slowly. I'm seeing it speed up a little bit because stuff gets around the globe now faster. But I'm also grateful I'm not doing anything in IT, which changes every 4 seconds, it seems like. This at least gives me a chance to catch up and stay current with it. The one other thing that I'm seeing a lot of, and I just wanted to mention this in terms of the impression we get when we read someone's writing, is going back and forth in a narrative from me, you, them, us. I mean, I'm reading something that says, okay, all of us should do this. That would make you look smart, and then that would make me look. And they're using pronouns willy-nilly when they're only writing about one person themselves, and it goes back to you and me and them. And I read it thinking, honey, whoa, take a breath. Are you writing about yourself? Then why are you throwing me in there? Why are you throwing him in there? It doesn't work the way it's being written. So it's something just when people are reading their own stuff, which almost nobody does, I think. We just send it out. Take a good look at the pronouns you're using and make sure that, A, they're the right ones, but are you being consistent? If you're talking about things that you should do as the reader, then stay with the you. Don't suddenly switch off and go back to yourself or us or them unless it makes absolute sense. And it usually doesn't, or I wouldn't be mentioning it. It's just, it gets clunky and chunky and ugly.
Yeah.
And people try so hard. I don't make fun of people. I make fun of sometimes of the results, but people try so hard. They're putting themselves on the line out there. They're writing it and hoping that, A, they don't get blasted by some troll, and B, that somebody actually likes it and believes in it. So I'm not saying that they're trying so hard.
Yeah.
And I respect.
Yeah.
I'm just grateful for you folks who say, Susan, will you take a... By the way, the listeners should know this one other thing. I'll proof 1 page free of anything. All right, I won't do it if it's about fractals or something. One of my guys, a young man, writes about fractals, and I had to look it up, and I don't remember, but it's something to do with engineering.
Okay.
If it's basic stuff, business writing, I will proof anything 1 page free.
Right.
It has to be something I can understand.
Sure.
For some reason, I'm using the word fractal.
And 1 page is about 300 words, so depending
Okay,
upon...
I mean...
roughly, depending upon the
sometimes,
paragraphs
roughly.
and the structure. A full page, considering that there's just indentation involved, it's between 300 and 350 words, I think it was. These days, we're counting characters. So,
I can't do that. No, I'm just going to go with the words on the page thing.
Yeah.
And if somebody's going to write it in size 4 font, that's not fair.
It sure isn't. Well, it
Normal
doesn't do...
10, 12.
But, you brought a great point. I think that's one to have a small little discussion, is that you want to write to where your reader can read. And I think in listening to someone else, I'm trying to think of the name of the person, but truly, if you write in 8 to 10 font, you are... you're trying to game the system in some kind of way, as
Yeah.
opposed to writing in 11 or 12, where it's easy for even somebody over 55 or 60 to see. And I'm not saying that if you're over that age, it's hard to see, but your sight does change when you get to
Yep,
that
it does.
age. So,
And the font use matters because Times New Roman is on the small side. Garamond is even smaller.
yeah,
Arial with no little feet on it is fine, but it's a little bit bigger, so you play with it. I mean, if you want to make a letter look a little more important and fill the page the way it should, if anybody writes letters anymore, I'm not totally sure they do,
right.
then the trick is to bulk it up one number or two. If you're writing an 11 and it's not quite filling it, throw it into 12. It won't be insulting.
Right.
It'll be readable. Somebody did put a post out recently, and I really do think it was something like size 7. And I just looked at it and went, you got to be kidding me, and I clicked on to the next post. I have no idea if it was any good or not.
And that's a great point. If I see it an 8, it's not going to be read in its entirety. I'm looking for the bold. I'm looking for the first 5 words in each paragraph.
Yep.
That's about it. I'm not going to read it all the way through.
Yeah. And, okay, let's stay with that writing for the second. Folks, listening to me, please believe this.
Yeah.
You cannot write a 30-line paragraph and expect anyone to read it at all.
Yeah.
You need to break the paragraphs. We learned back in school, many of us, if you don't have a new thought, you're not supposed to have a new paragraph. Dump the idea in the nearest trash bin. If you're writing business writing, you really need to break it somewhere around 8 or 9 lines. Nobody is going to write to you, all right, maybe one troll in a million, and say, oh, look, you had a single thought and you had 3 paragraphs. They're only going to know it's readable. Break the paragraphs.
Yeah.
For goodness sake. I look at some of them and it just goes on and on and on. I can't find, if I were in the middle of it, I wouldn't know what the next line was because my eyes, there's no white space.
Yeah.
White space
Sure
is really good.
Oh, and it gives people a break, but it makes it easier to read because most people, most studies are going to tell you that these days people aren't reading your article, your post, your update always in its entirety. They're looking for looking for the key phrases, they're looking for the key words and what they really need to know. And so writing something really long with no paragraphs will likely get you ignored. But that's but that's a hard rule to remember because, in high school, they're still teaching 5 sentences per paragraph. And depending upon the length of your sentences, really shouldn't be all that long anyway.
They shouldn't, no.
25, 30 words per sentence is a pretty good lengthy sentences these days as opposed to what used to be, I think somebody pointed out like 40 words per sentence or something like that is way, way too long.
Way too long. Since nobody knows how to punctuate, it really is hard to read.
Right. But then it becomes, it lacks interest most of the time because most people don't write well enough to keep somebody's interest. But that's a whole nother story. But like you said, I think the aesthetics really do count.
They count because it's like anything else. You go into an interview and you wear a suit and tie if that's the kind of job you're applying for. You don't go in greasy old clothes that look like they were slept in for a week. The first impression matters. If it looks okay, and okay can be different for different people, but if it basically looks like it's readable with whatever standard you're applying to it, you will read it. You'll at least go through it, skimming it, whatever. If it looks impossible, I haven't got time for that stuff, and you move on. Right. If it looks like you're never going to slog through it, and even the headline doesn't grab you, you're not going to read it. And what a waste of time for the writer. It's really okay to have shorter sentences. When I train for the business writing, it's very simple. 18-ish. I keep under 25. Give or take 18 average. Now, this is average. We're certainly saying you can have a 25 and you can have a 5-word sentence. But if you have all 5-word sentences, it looks like you never left second grade. And if they're all 25 to 40, who are you kidding?
Right.
No, it doesn't work. The Flesch-Kincaid scale, which is built into Microsoft and probably into Apple, is a great tool just to check how many words roughly are in your sentences. And if it's somewhere in the 9th grade reading level, you're fine. If it says you're writing to 11th or 12th in business writing, can you stop? That's going to probably be way too long and way too tough, and a lot of folks are just going to tune you out. And what a shame.
Right.
You're putting this stuff, this effort into your writing. So the Flesch, it's FLESCH-KINCAID, I believe, Flesch Kincaid. All it shows you is the reading level. 8th or 9th grade for business writing is absolutely fine. It's business, it's mature, it's professional, but it doesn't get you in trouble with this, who's he kidding?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Well, I think...
It's just
Yeah, I was going to say that I think this also built into if you're like writing articles on WordPress, I think WordPress uses that now because there's a tab if you go into the word processing part. And not that I'm advocating you should use that, but it's likely that you're going to copy and paste into it. That there's a tab for readability now. And I think that's the metric that they use that you mentioned.
Yeah, somewhere around 8th or 9th grade. And in no way is that dumbing down. In no way. It's business writing, which is, again, the goal. Clarity.
I think even 4th or 5th grade is really a good barometer as far as the simplicity of writing.
KISS, and I don't mean keep it simple, stupid. I don't like that phrase at all, but keep it short and simple.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Your goal is not to press. Your goal is to convey information. In business writing, again, you and I discussed creative writing. That's a whole other world. That's E.E. Cummings with no capital letters. That's Lewis Carroll.
Right, Ernest Hemingway with fragmented sentences.
Yeah. But this is business writing, and there is a system. Even if people aren't sure what it should be, they don't know necessarily. They do know when they see it. Isn't that funny? They wouldn't be able to say to you, "Oh, it should have 9-line paragraphs and it should have short." They just know when they see it, it looks right.
Yeah,
and it looks readable. And the last point on this is, please don't stretch for words you can't spell and can't pronounce and aren't sure of, because you will look. Any one of us would look really dumb using the wrong word because we thought somebody out there who was smart used it in a different context, and we just thought, "Oh God, that's a great word." Here's my thought. This is the 2 questions I ask all the time. One of them is wrong and one of them is right. I don't want anyone to ever ask again, "How smart is he?" Mark, you are smart in places that I am probably dumber than a bunny. But the question should be, how is he smart? Not how smart is he. I have a daughter who's got a very high IQ, but when she was a kid, we wouldn't trust her to cross the street because she never looked both ways.
Mm.
I mean, a dumb bunny in terms of keeping safe for a long time.
Right.
It isn't about how smart you are. It's how are you smart. I'm smart in grammar. You're smart in all these things you're doing right now. The people listening are all smart in places you and I probably just are in awe of. We're looking going, really? You know that stuff? Seriously. You know fractals. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's how is he smart?
In education, it's called multiple intelligences.
Yeah.
That where everybody's word smart, number smart, aesthetically smart, kinesiology smart. I mean, there's about 8, actually might be 9 of them. But I think the point is that everybody's smart in different ways, and we can't ever classify someone as overall being stupid because they may need to lead you out of a tunnel one day.
Yeah, they may very well. People say, "Oh, my boss is really smart and she does it this way," and I'm thinking she's probably a brilliant executive. I see empathy, I see compassion. She team leads, she's wonderful, but her grammar, not so much.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that she's stupid in it. It just means that is not her absolute strength.
It doesn't speak to the whole person, right?
But I'm very bad in numbers, and I majored, God help us, in accounting. And I learned, to my horror, that is not anything I ever want to deal with again as long as I live. I can do 10% of anything, which gets me by. I round up everything, even in my checkbook, as long as it's not a big roundup.
Mm-hmm.
numbers and I do not get along well. Does that mean I'm dumb? No. But I'm not very smart in numbers. It's not a place where I have strength.
Yeah.
The English language, grammar, writing, yes. But numbers, yeah, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm better at words than numbers, for sure. That's for
and
sure.
blessed be the students who are good at numbers.
Yeah.
You do want to have people who are good at that stuff doing it.
Absolutely.
So this is what it's all about. How are we smart? How do we all work together? And how do I help people look and sound as smart as they are? Well, I have one way of doing it. Others will have different. But if we work as a team, we all benefit.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Susan, I think we have done well in exploring the different styles and the different ways to appear smarter in our writing. And also so we went into the semantics a little, probably deeper than most people who want to ultimately hear. But we're going to publish every second of this. So if people want to connect with you, want to know more about you, or even possibly hire you for some reason, how should they contact you?
They can go to my website. All the information is there. I invite them to read. I do have a very large number of posts, as you mentioned. You don't have to read them all, but on my website, they're categorized, so it's easier. If you really do want to read the fun ones, you can just read those. If you want to read the American grammar that I put out every Monday, you can just read those. Yes, LinkedIn. I'm also on a platform called BB, which is small b-e, capital B-E-E. Mm-hmm. It's a new LinkedIn sort of platform, an excellent one. I'm starting to write for Medium, and I'm hopeful someday HuffPost will pick me up. That would be nice. They can find me, though, but the straightest line, my website, GrammarGoddes.com.
Well, it was an honor and pleasure to have you here on The Voice of Job Seekers. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much for reaching out, and I will look forward to having a chance to publicize this and get your name out there as well.